Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a special meeting of the Bristol Planning Commission. I'd like to start off by having the members introduce themselves, starting on my far left.
Roland Orange, your alternate.
John Solis, Vice Chairman.
And on my far right.
Alan Weiner, City Planner.
Glenn Chalder, Planning Consultant.
Robert Flanagan, Assistant City Planner.
Paul Stroderman, City Engineer.
Here, the Commission.
Bill Leeds, Chairman. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes on March 4th, 2014. The voting members on the minutes will be Commissioner Soares, Commissioner Harrigan, and Commissioner Ranger. Motion would be in order.
Motion to accept the minutes of the special meeting of March 4th, 2014.
Second.
Motion was made and second. Any discussion? If none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 2, update of the 2000 Plan of Conservation and Development. Commission review of the first draft of 2015 Plan of Conservation and Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think I have the pleasure of preparing for you a first draft of the Plan of Conservation and Development. As you know, we have a public information meeting scheduled for January. And this is the plan document which will be presented to the community. And we're on schedule, on track to move towards adoption by July 1 of 2015. So at our last meeting, what we talked about was getting together tonight and giving the Commission an opportunity to provide comments and feedback on this draft plan. If there's any changes or comments which we think are important to make, we'll bring those up as part of our presentation at the information meeting in January. But again, I think based on our previous work and discussions with you, this represents the initial working draft of the plan. And the most important thing that I can do now is work with you to refine the language in here to make sure it reflects your goals, ideals, and vision for the future of the city. So with that, I think it probably makes sense for us to start walking through the document. Any other thoughts on it?
I guess my only comment initially is that I think the Commission and staff and the public need to keep in mind, as Glenn has indicated, is this is a preliminary draft. It's a working draft. It's not the final document. It's not even the final document that will eventually go to public hearing. But it's the place to start the conversation. It's really a compilation of many of the discussions that the Commission and the public have had over the last several months since the Commission started on the update, and really kind of assembles it into a single document. But it is subject to changes being made, so I think we want people, be they Commission members or public, to understand that this certainly represents the Commission's and hopefully the public's best thinking to date, but it's a draft, and it is subject to revisions, both large and small, hopefully more small than large, but it's the place to start to get everything in one place and to start the conversation about the various components of the plan and the meat of the plan.
Well, I know I made a comment in the beginning, to Glenn about going through this. I think one of the best parts about this was the survey results in certain chapters instead of putting it in one chapter. That way it was carried through the entire plan. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought that was a great way of showing the surveys.
Mr. Chairman, just one minor comment. I just wanted to congratulate Mr. Chalder on organizing this plan into a very readable document. Obviously, it does need some tweaks, but I think the readability of the document has been greatly improved over the 2000 plan. No offense to the 2000 plan.
No, you're right.
I believe the organization and the general layout is very readable, and I wanted to commend Mr. Chalder for his effort.
I second that. Thank you very much. Great job. So, I don't know how the commissioners feel about doing this. You want to start in the beginning, go chapter by chapter, and is there anything?
I was going to ask you your thoughts on the organization of the plan, but Bob just said I think So I do think that the organization, as the commission uses the plan, will start to feel much more natural to you. And as a result, with the tabs, you'll be able to quickly find what it is that you're looking for, and I think other people will too. So I hope again is that this will be a user-friendly document for you and for others in the city for that reason. So I think rather than necessarily go through page by page, if we were to go through it chapter by chapter and thoughts or comments from people and see how the conversation goes.
Would it be helpful, I mean, notwithstanding the fact that presumably everybody has read, if not all of it, much of it, would it be helpful to have Glenn kind of walk us through kind of the big picture of how this is organized, how he decided on organizing it the way it's organized, and kind of the highlights of it?
Yeah, sure. I think it's been my experience over the years working with a number of different communities that a plan can be broken down into sort of three main pieces, if you will, from policy perspective. The first major section is things in the community that people feel are important to protect or preserve, and we've called those in this plan conservation strategies. And oftentimes, for a lot of people, they can't even open their minds up to thinking about future changes in the city until they're familiar with the idea that things that they value or treasure about the city are going to be protected or preserved. So the conservation strategies that have been identified in here for the city, there's four main sections underneath that umbrella, include things like protecting natural resources, preserving open space, enhancing community character, and enhancing sustainability and resiliency. And I think within here, again, we'll find the things that, from the survey results, et cetera, people have indicated are important to them in the city and things that they feel should be protected or preserved. Since it is a plan of conservation and development, the next major section is development, and this is how the city might approach guiding growth or change in the future. In communities which are rural, if you will, it's often growth. But in a community like Bristol, which is predominantly developed, it's change. Redevelopment of existing sites or new activities that are happening in existing neighborhoods, et cetera. And the plan contains 4 chapters here as well. The first of which is strengthening and enhancing the downtown. The next one is promoting business development, guiding residential development, and then enhancing the different neighborhoods and places within the city overall. The West End, Forestville, etc. And then the third major thematic element of the plan are infrastructure strategies, and these are things that the community and its residents want or need to enhance their quality of life or meet their other objectives. The way these 3 major themes tie together, conservation, development, and infrastructure, are really the key elements of the plan. And under infrastructure, we include things like community facilities, transportation, both vehicular, pedestrian, bicycle, transit, etc., and then utility infrastructure like water, sewer, and other things. So with those 3 elements, we cover most of the topics related to the future physical development of the city. More detailed goals, policies, recommendations are within each of these chapters, and we've packaged it up front with an introduction, which is conditions and trends affecting the city or expected to affect the city, issues raised by the community at our initial public meeting and in the telephone survey, and then really a conclusion at the end in terms of how we can go ahead and implement the plan. So I think if at any time in the future the commission or residents approaching the plan, is the first question you ask yourself is this likely to be a conservation issue, a development issue, or an infrastructure issue, is really going to start to focus you in. I think one of the challenges I had working with the current plan right off the bat is some of the chapters and concepts were kind of overlapping with each other. So we had a chapter which was, I think, environment, open space, and recreation facilities. And they're really 3 very different things, one of which is protecting our natural environment, the second one is preserving the land as open space, and the third is providing ball fields. And they're not always consistent in working with each other. So again, I think if we keep this in mind, it'll help guide use of the plan. I think this is where the tabs come in too. If you start and look at the tabs and say, okay, I think what I'm looking for is probably in here, you're probably on here. Did you have any thoughts, Alan?
No, not immediately.
So the first tab, if you will, is planning context. The first 3 chapters in here, again, are the introduction, then the conditions and trends, and then the third chapter is the community issues and concerns. Any thoughts, observations on chapter 1? Or chapter 2?
Chapter 2 was a nice history for Bristol. Very detailed and chronologically in order. It was very good.
I think Bristol has a fascinating history.
Yeah.
I mean, just the different eras and how Bristol capitalized on them is, I think, important to understand.
Glenn, I think what was also important was the tip of the cap to the 1920 plan with the cover, speaking about the history of plans of conservation and development in the city. And as you've noted during past meetings, that this will be the 100th anniversary of the plan in 2020. So I thought the use of the cover was particularly appropriate.
I think it's also important because city plans were not, the National City Planning Enabling Act really didn't come into being until about 1929. The Zoning Enabling Act, model Zoning Enabling Act was 1926, I believe. So Hartford, I think, was the first city in the country to establish a planning commission back in 1911. So for Bristol to have prepared a plan in 1920 was really pioneering. And I think it's really kind of that heritage, I thought was important for us to recognize, is that this is not a modest effort, if you will, in the history of the city, that a plan like this really can make a difference in the long-term directions. And that's, I think, harking back to the centennial of the plan, I think, is an important concept.
As a humorous aside to that, I can tell you that if you look at the minutes of city council meetings from when the Nolan plan was completed, and I've seen the minutes of the meeting, there was apparently a rather lively discussion by the then city council as to how many copies of the plan of the Nolan plan the city should acquire. And even back almost 100 years ago, they were arguing about how much money should be spent or not spent, and how many copies the city should have printed of the Nolan plan. So some issues never disappear.
It was probably not a budgeted item, and that's why they were talking about it.
And of course, the amount they were talking about at that time was, a couple of $1,000,
yeah.
which
A lot of money.
It was a lot of money at that time.
That's right.
So some things never change.
And interesting, statistics in this whole plan. Chapter 8 with the Bristol's population. From the 1790s to projected in 2030. It's just amazing how much it grew.
On page 10, I'm a bit of a policy wonk. So I found this chart useful, but people have told me over the years that they really sort of don't get this chart. So I've actually played around with a different approach, which I may use as part of the presentation in January at the public meeting to see if people get it better, to really understand the dynamics of our migration patterns and what happens. Because I think it's really kind of important for Bristol to understand who it attracts and who chooses to leave or move out. Because demographics are our destiny in a lot of different ways. And if people aren't getting this chart, there may be a better way. So I haven't prepared them yet for Bristol, but I have prepared a spreadsheet that will do it. So I think what I'll probably do is share this with Alan and Bob, and if they think it's an improvement, I may reconfigure page 10 to make this story clearer.
Okay.
Any comments on chapter 2? I've used a decimal numbering system here to, again, hopefully make it easier for the commission to reference things should they need them. Chapter 3 is an overview of the key issues that we learned from our scoping meetings, and then also from the beginning of the telephone survey that, as Bill indicated, we took the survey results and really kind of put those throughout the plan so that as we're having a conversation about natural resources, for example, the opinions of the residents are right there.
And then really these first two chapters kind of set the table in terms of establishing how the city has developed and grown over the years, how the population has evolved and changed over time, how housing and other land uses have materialized in Bristol over the years, and kind of where we are today.
And I think to help people in the future understand what was going on as we were making these decisions, it's possible that over the next 5, 10, or 20 years, some major trend could take place, and people would look back and say, well, why was the city doing this? And the issue is, hopefully, the explanation is here. This is what we felt was the best policy for the city at this time. And if circumstances change, then we'll adapt our policy. But in the meantime, this is the way to kind of explain our thinking as this plan was being prepared.
I also think that one of the takeaways from chapters such as this, and I will plead guilty to sometimes doing it myself, is that we tend to sometimes get bogged down in the minutiae of numbers. Well, this doesn't quite add up, or why is it 750 and not 800? And I think what this plan seeks to accomplish, and what we all have to kind of keep in mind, is not getting bogged down in the minutiae and sort of looking at this from 30,000 feet and going, okay, what does this tell us? I mean, the information is interesting, and sometimes it can be interesting for its own sake, but more importantly, what's its value in terms of doing a planning document, thinking about the future. What do these trends tell us? And again, not getting bogged down in, well, how many acres is that exactly, and what are the trends? What's happened over the last 10, 15 years in terms of land use, in terms of changes in the population? I think that it's important to have all this information here, but to keep in mind what its big picture function is.
Right. But it's a good introduction.
Absolutely.
Really great introduction.
What I like about it too is, you get a new family moving into town. You want to find out a little bit of history about the town and everything that's going on. You open up right in the front page. I mean, organizing the way it is from step by step takes you into Bristol. Its history, what it's all about, and then starts with the population, economics, and all that. I mean, it's a great tool for somebody new coming in.
Glenn, were you surprised by the, obviously you looked at demographics and land use data before you started the project, but once you had it mapped out, were you surprised by the amount of open space in the city?
So when you say open space, do you mean land preserved as open space or vacant land? Or
The 16% figure that you have on page 18.
16%, 10%.
10%, sorry.
That's right. Yeah.
I get 6% anymore.
No, I think the city has done an excellent job in terms of preserving open space areas. The city is very fortunate right now because of some of the topography we have in town, that we've got some large areas which are still zoned residentially but not developed, that really enhance the character of the city. And that's, I think, one of the things that we then start to talk about later on in the conservation strategies is we've been able to preserve 10% of our land as open space, but in addition to that, we have additional land which is 11%, which is vacant, potentially developable. And if that land were to develop, it's going to change the character of the city. So how can we devote our efforts to trying to preserve these things? I think the survey shows that the residents of Bristol care very much about their community and how it looks, et cetera, and trying to move in that direction. So I think the city has got some wonderful parks and watershed lands that have been preserved. My hope for the city moving forward is that they would be able to sort of continue those efforts and even do more to try to interconnect these open space areas together. I think it would be my hope that over the next 10, 20, or 30 years that we could create kind of an interconnected open space greenway system. That would be pretty huge.
And maybe promoting some infill development and not greenfield development.
We do have this white area right in the center of town. That would be nice to, yes.
I guess it's kind of a follow-up to Bob's question would be to ask Glenn if there was anything in the changing demographics of the community that you found, or that you didn't anticipate that surprising.
What I did find a little surprising was the fact that the projections do hold the possibility of some population decreases in the future. And a lot of this has to do with the aging baby boom, and the fact that people are, as baby boom ages, households will be getting smaller. So a housing unit will go from being occupied perhaps by 2 people to being occupied by 1 person. And over the 20,000 plus households in the city, that can make a huge difference. Just a change in 1 of 100 housing units, extrapolate over 20,000 housing units can make a change. So it's really hard to predict, particularly as we start to go further and further out. So when we're in the year 2014, predicting out to the year 2040 is almost like voodoo economics or something. But if we look at the trends that have happened in the city historically and say, if those trends continue, we could be looking at a situation that the population really actually has quite a spread from either an increase or a decrease. This is the type of thing for us to just keep in mind as we go forward.
I know if you look on page 80, on the left-hand side, the populations, if you look from 1990 to 2010, the population has stayed essentially the same. And I know that during that period of time, the number of new housing units has increased, and that really sort of speaks to Glenn's point that even though the population has remained steady, the number of households has increased. People are living longer, they're getting divorced, they're getting married later, households are smaller. So all those societal trends that are happening everywhere in the United States are happening in Bristol, and they translate out into changes to the development patterns and land use patterns.
Just following what Alan just mentioned, if there's a sidebar on page 14 that shows that between 1990 and 2010, the city added over 2,000 housing units. So 1,000 housing units, 100 housing units a year, or 2,000 over 20 years, and yet our population didn't change much. You say to yourself, well, how can that be? And again, it's the changing composition of individual housing units during that time frame. And that's what I think a lot of this information in terms of births, deaths, migration, et cetera, really starts to show. Anything else on the context tab? So the next tab is, again, the conservation strategies, things that Bristol may want to protect or preserve in the future. There's 4 chapters in here. We have protecting natural resources, preserving open space, community character, and then the 4th chapter is sustainability and resiliency. Protecting natural resources is a new chapter. Again, it was merged with a lot of other stuff and actually kind of throughout the plan, and we've pulled it out here as a separate element, and really on page 31 added a map. It says, okay, here's where the natural resources, in particular the sensitive natural resources in Bristol are. Natural wetlands, water courses, floodplains, steep slopes, aquifer protection areas, public water supply watershed areas, information which may be useful to the Commission and others in thinking about the future conservation and development of the city.
My observation is that the aquifer protection areas, Alan will speak to this, are a new regulatory feature that we've implemented within the last few years based on mandates from the state of Connecticut. We've registered businesses in the existing aquifer protection areas noted on this map in the green. And we have about 3 or 4 more businesses to go. I think we've registered over 20 businesses in that area. Several probably 40 or 50 businesses were reviewed for activity within that area that may have a potential effect on the aquifer. So the point being that this is something new for this plan in 2015. That wasn't in the 2000 plan.
So when you say registered with the state?
With us, locally.
Oh, here?
Yep, and we register them locally. The Zoning Commission acts as the Aquifer Protection Agency here in the city of Bristol. We go through a registration process with each of these businesses. The commission accepts the registration, and then we send it out to the state of Connecticut, and they log it into their database.
And basically,
Nice.
yeah, and basically the sort of the big picture view of the Aquifer Protection Program is a state mandated, and it is the state's program to protect public drinking water supplies that are supplied by public drinking water wells, not private individual wells. But you know, if you think about the Bristol Water Department, they certainly have surface reservoirs, but some of the water that's provided by the Bristol Water Department, as well as the Britain Water Department, comes from underground aquifers that is retrieved through wells. And you know, the aquifer protection area that Bob just referred to, the one in the Mixed Street, Maltby Street area, that's a New Britain Water Department aquifer. That's their wells eventually pump water all the way down into New Britain. It's one of the reasons why that area is essentially undeveloped. And unless they abandon those well fields, that's an area that's going to have to be protected. And the state's program, it's a mandated program, basically limits certain activities within that aquifer protection area to make sure that the drinking water supplies remain as uncontaminated as possible.
Does Bristol still have agreement with New Britain for if we have an emergency?
I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. But that's a
Emergency interconnection?
There was one at
They-
the corner of
yeah.
Mix and Stafford.
They may still have that. But that's a big area, but on the other hand, it's one of the reasons why that area is in relative terms, is not as highly developed as it could be. You go down Mixed Street in Maltby and you see this undeveloped area that's public. You know, there may not be a reservoir there, but there's public drinking water supply, which Bristol is mandated to protect for New Britain, just as other communities would have to protect our water supply.
So we've met with each one of these businesses and educated them on best management practices for their business in order to protect the water supply. The shaded green area, as we said, that's the first level. Level A, is it, Alan?
Yeah.
Level A, we've registered businesses in that area. We have about 3 or 4 more to do. The next level of protection will be coming within the next few years, is the areas shaded in blue out on Route 6 underneath that, and then out towards Terryville. Again, that's preliminary mapping for those well fields. That potential future aquifer protection area may get smaller once the final mapping is approved and sent to us from the state of Connecticut. So, again, something new for the 2015 plan.
And after this plan is adopted, if those aquifer protection areas that are shown on this map currently as potential become existing, you may want to, and as Bob said, that the area may get smaller. You'll probably want to amend the map to show another existing area. But as this plan is being prepared, this represents the current status of the aquifer protection area. Bob's right. Back in 2000, this wasn't the kind of issue that it has become now.
And one final note on aquifer protection: our former assistant city planner, Chris Boschamine, did a lot of the heavy lifting on this. I've basically just raising the flag at the flagpole based on all his hard work. So I always try to give him credit for all the hard work that he did. So he did a great job.
This is the first time, too, on page 30, I'm looking for the quick overview of how the chapters are structured. For example, generally speaking, the first part of a chapter, in this case 4.1, is an overview of the topic, why we care about it. why it's important for the future of the city. Generally then, the section 4.2 is our overall goal. It's meant to sort of quickly summarize, if you will, the strategic direction that the city proposes to go in. Below that, we have 4.3, which are policies. Policies tend to be ongoing statements that were never really completed. So we're always going to want to protect water courses, and that's really a policy statement. And then we have on the following page, or on page 32, we have action steps. Action steps are actual actions that the commission or other city agencies could take to help enhance and produce the results which are intended. So, for example, here under water resource protection, an action step talks about implementing LID approaches, the low-impact development approaches in Bristol, and regulations, et cetera, to actually make these things happen. So in each chapter, if the commission was having a meeting, how can we implement the plan, you might start to look at the action steps about things that you can do. If an application was to come before the commission, you say, is this application or zone change, is it consistent with our plan? You might go and then start to look at the policies or the maps and say, you know, this is consistent, or I have some questions about whether or not. And I think, again, it's that organization which is really a follow-through from the 2000 plan, which I think is going to enhance its user-friendliness too as well. Any other thoughts on chapter 4?
On your action steps, number 441 for water resource protection. I read number 1 and number 2 as being kind of redundant. Are there different things you're trying to get at there?
They are slightly different, only this is the DEP's approach to these things. So implementing LID approaches could be things like the Public Works Department installing a swale instead of an actual basin itself, or it could be the Zoning Commission adopting regulations, or the Planning Commission modifying the subdivision regulations to include it. Removing impediments can be things in the regulations. For example, some communities, the subdivision regulations don't allow a curbless road. So you can't have a leak-off, if you will, to infiltrate the water if you require curbs. So one could be actually sort of doing the work, and the second one is allowing flexibility on curbs, or parking lot islands. And their LID, oftentimes parking lot islands are what they call innies rather than outies. An outie island pops up and it's landscaped, and an innie island drops down and the water leaks through and in and percolates. And so some communities require a 6-inch raised curb on the island, and that's not going to allow for LID. So it's really kind of the yin and the yang about promoting and then also removing impediments, which I was trying to capture. So there might have been one global verb that could have worked here, but I think they're just two separate concepts.
A couple of observations here, which I think really apply to the rest of the document as well. One having to do with the policies. One of the things that I've been trying to do as I've read through the document is to, as best I can, is to try to identify if the policies that are listed here are similar to or the same as existing policies in your existing plan, or if they perhaps are new policies. I'm hardly all the way there, but I think my general observation is that many of your existing policies are continued in this plan. They may be in a different section. They may have been reworded to either make them stronger or to clarify them, but in many instances, the policies that you had, or that you currently have in the 2000 plan, have been carried over to this plan. To the extent that we can to try to identify some of the newer ones, we'll certainly try to do that for you. And certainly if you see a policy here that doesn't ring true with you in terms of, that sounds like it's a new one, we can try to track it. And the second thing that I would point out on the action steps, and again I think it's applicable through the whole plan, is that, and Glenn can certainly clarify this, is that these action steps are not exclusively the domain of the Planning Commission. So just then again, those of you who were involved in the West End neighborhood study will recall that you had a series of recommendations, and in some instances, or in many instances, they didn't involve the Planning Commission. They involved other agencies of the city, or the city partnering with a state agency or the private developer. And this is the same kind of thing, that there may be actions here which other boards and commissions, other agencies, other entities might end up implementing. And I think what that tries to do is to reinforce the fact that this isn't simply the Planning Commission's plan, this is the city's plan. That you are given the authority under state law to prepare the plan, but the way the process is set up in the statutes is you're the lead agency, you get as much input as you can from other boards, commissions, elected officials, the public, other interested parties. You put the document together, it has to go through a public review and formal process, but when you're all done, it's the city's plan. I think this commission has worked pretty hard over the last several years to try to reinforce that point with especially the elected officials, to understand that there are things in here that Planning Commission can only identify as an action to be taken, and it's up to whether it's the council, the Board of Finance, or whoever to help implement it.
Yeah, looking at the old plan versus this, action steps basically eliminated the recommendation word.
But I think
that's what it seemed like.
Yeah, I think recommendation is sort of a word, if you will, that doesn't impart direction.
Right.
Action step says
do it.
Get going on this type of stuff. So it was a conscious choice to try to promote action.
That was good.
On page 32, I just wanted to point out that that's the closest picture I could come up for Sean, our distinguished videographer. It's not Sean, but it looks like Sean.
Oh, I was going to say, I'm in there, geez.
I tried, Sean.
I tried to stay behind the camera.
I know, that's why I wanted to make sure that we tried to get Sean in. He's been at all of our meetings, so.
That's him without the beard.
I have the hard hat.
He's up to his hips here in water, so, hot water, so. There you go. Chapter 5 is the chapter about preserving open space in the city, and again, we've broken this out because it was merged with some other chapters before. We've tried to identify and categorize open space. I think it's important at this point to just point out for the city that all the mapping that has been done as part of our work, all this data will be turned over to the city, and so this information can be improved, maintained, enhanced, refined over time, and really become usable by all city agencies in terms of things that they may want to do. So the map on page 35 categorizes open space by ownership, and that starts to now allow us to figure out ways that we can perhaps build on this framework to preserve open space, et cetera.
I like that definition on page 33.
What's that, John?
The open space definition. Sometimes it's used loosely.
Land which is primarily intended for passive uses or to remain undeveloped.
Any other thoughts on Chapter 5? Chapter 6 is a long chapter. It really has to do with this concept of what is community character. And I think if I was to interview each person around the table and say, what is the character of Bristol? What is it about Bristol? Does it mean something to you? Everybody would have a different theme or a different concept, but they'd all relate to sort of the same thing. So this gets into the issues related to farms and undeveloped land and historic resources and important land uses and activities in the community, the scenic resources, community design, et cetera, and strategies and concepts to try to promote and enhance these in the future.
I just have a question. On 46 and 47, overall goals versus policies. And again, it's probably okay the way it is. It seems like that you're just repeating themselves. 6.21 and 6.22 versus 6.31 and 6.32.
I think this is a case where our goals and policies are very closely aligned. So if there's subtle changes in wording that would make these policies better, I would certainly be open and receptive to making those changes.
I think that one of the things that we will get together with Glenn and do is do some wordsmithing. A lot of my notes are not substantive, they're more, again, wordsmithing and trying to clarify some of the language. I think what's important is obviously that the intent of the goal, the intent of the policy is maintained. But what you may see is the next iteration. This may not read exactly the same as what you have now. I mean, if the commission has things that they would like, feel are inaccurate or perhaps not worded as clearly as they should, certainly this is one of the opportunities to point those things out. But having said that, I don't know that you want to sit here for 2-3 hours of wordsmithing. I mean, you have to, trust that your consultant and your staff are going to kind of do some of that heavy lifting and try to identify where things may need to be wordsmithed a little bit, again, without changing the intent of a particular goal or policy or action step or whatever the language might be.
Glenn, on page 49, the yellow highlight, could you explain that?
Thank you. That was my next point to bring up. As part of our discussion, so the topic that is highlighted here that I wanted to go over again with the commission was the concept of a design review process in Bristol. And so as part of our discussion, we were a little timid about that and kind of held back. We weren't sure whether or not we should recommend that or push this or whether we might be criticized for it. And I did notice in the survey results that 76% of Bristol residents either agreed or strongly agreed that the city should have a say as to what the outside of new commercial and industrial buildings look like. So I didn't know if the tentative wording, which is right now on page number 4, if you wanted to strengthen that or that wording was fine, but I just highlighted those.
Same percentage also agrees, either agrees or disagrees. So. You would take those two.
Yeah, I think that I would draw the line between agree and disagree. So we got 76% that strongly agree or agree, and 20% that disagree or strongly disagree. So again, that's just the verbiage here. It was really, I think, the only example I found where the survey results didn't really align with what our policies and recommendations were. Would you like to strengthen this language, or would you like to leave it the way it is in number 4?
I guess it seems to me that there is the fact that the public overwhelmingly feels that the city should, that people should be concerned with, new development looks like. I guess it raises the question of, can you get from that to let's establish a design review process? I mean, that is certainly a way of dealing with the issue. It's certainly the best way of dealing with the issue from a regulatory standpoint. So I guess the question, I don't know if you went back and asked those people, how do you feel if the city regulated the design of buildings, through a design review process, whether you necessarily get the same answers.
So
I
leave the wording the way it is for number 4? I mean, I think the wording 4.4 is fine. I just wanted to point out that this was, I thought, the most glaring contrast, if you will. So I'm
going
good
to just take out the qualifier and say consider establishing a design review process for industrial and commercial buildings. Doesn't commit you to it, but recognize the fact that there might be some merit to it.
Yeah. I think there might be a school of thought also, if I could just take the opposite side of the equation here. that some folks might feel that design review might discourage development if someone can't necessarily build what they want to build.
I agree.
Or how to build.
Exactly. Why put further restrictions on a city that's already hurting, that our manufacturing base is going down? There's a huge trend that was indicated in earlier chapters that our manufacturing base is basically going away. And this is putting further restrictions on commercial and industrial buildings. It might very well scare more people away from even looking at the city.
I knew there was another side to the equation.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah,
that's my opinion.
I think
I don't
whether
believe
we
regulation.
don't qualify it, I think if we don't qualify it, that thought's going to come out whether it's true or not, and it will mean harder work getting back to what we're just considering. It may or may not be appropriate when, in fact, I could say that in the first place.
Well, I think that if you just left this like this, then what it just says is that in the future, the people that were for and against this type of regulation can decide, is that really the area that we want to go? Is that what we're here for, to decide whether?
No, but it seems to me that assuming one feels that the city should, in fact, have a say in what new development looks like, it seems to me that there may be more than one way to skin that cat. And to say that it's going to simply be done through a design review process, that may not be the most appropriate way in a city like Bristol to accomplish that. And it may be that it gets accomplished maybe not through a regulatory process. So perhaps if the concern is that the city really needs to be more sensitive to what buildings look like, perhaps there's language that can be included that makes that point and uses the design review process as an example of, or an option that might be available to accomplish that.
I think if the Commission's comfortable, I think leave the language the way it is in 4, but add some additional language at the end. So I would, for your consideration, have it read as follows. If appropriate in the future, comma, consider establishing a design review process or other approaches where the city might have a say as to what the outside of new commercial and industrial buildings look like. So it points to what Alan said, is that it now creates symmetry. The residents have said they would like us to have ways to do it, and we've said we'll consider that. It could be a design review process or other approaches that might do that, but I also think it says if appropriate and consider. So I think it could, address the comments so far.
How would the design process work?
I think that's probably a debate for another time, and I think as was pointed
How
out,
much time do you have?
there's proponents and opponents on both sides.
Right.
So it probably needs to be fleshed out. Residents have indicated they think this is important, but how important? If we got to a choice of industrial development or no industrial development, people might back off and the percentages might change. But we didn't ask the question quite that way. So I think the issue is if we just leave it out there as this is a strategic direction for us to consider in the future, I think that's a good approach.
I think what the survey indicates is that many people in Bristol are concerned with the appearance of new commercial and industrial development. They haven't indicated what they'd like to do about it.
But they're concerned about it.
But they've indicated that they are concerned about how, and I will tell you that, I'm not going to sit here and say we hear it all the time, but we hear it more than you think. People are concerned that and a lot of times they will compare it to, and I'm not going to pick on any chain store or franchise, but gee, I went to, pick another town, and I went to that store's, or that chain store's store in that town, and it looks so much nicer than the one we have in Bristol. How come we can't get that in Bristol? And we do hear that. And it's not that, oh, woe is us, they won't come to Bristol. There's a school of thought that says that when you establish design guidelines, however you do it, that raises the quality of development. In fact, it doesn't. What it scares away is it scares away the marginal developers who will put up the cheapest, ugliest building they can possibly get away with, as opposed to the developer who says, I'm willing to go through this and give you a really nice design because I know that my investment is protected because you're going to have to do the same thing to other people.
I remember that very, for some reason, that one particular application, which I don't need to mention, but I remember that same very conversation that we wrestled with and wrestled with and wrestled with. And theirs was, I guess for lack of a better word, cookie cutter, which is supposed to fit everywhere. And that's the kind of discussion we had with them. And I think they gave a little bit on it, but it was a long, prolonged discussion just about that point.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was in our minutes, so.
Right.
I think that was Acme.
I don't remember the name, but
But having,
I know,
right,
right.
But having said that, a formal design review process may not be the best way to go. That's fraught with its own issues and problems, among the chief of which is that because it's advisory and there very often aren't objective standards, it comes down to what do you like versus what somebody else likes. And, you know, it's the old taste is in, you know, the eye of the beholder, if that's not mixing metaphors.
Too late.
Too late, I think it did. So that's why I say limiting it to establishing or considering establishing a design review process, I think, is limiting. I think there may be other approaches to get at the same thing without what's viewed as again, what can sometimes be a bureaucratic and subjective design review process that may in fact discourage people from coming to your community.
You want to add the term, add the phrase or other
Well, I think that's what Glenn.
process? Or did you? Yeah.
But we can, if that's the commission's wish, we can certainly tweak that language. All right, so can you read that one more time real quick, please? We'll copy it. No, it's not. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it is. It's on. I'll have to go back and watch Sean's video.
If appropriate in the future, consider establishing a design review process or other approaches where the city might have a say, and then I pick up the language of the
Okay.
sidewalk.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts on Chapter 6? Chapter 7 has to do with the concepts of sustainability and resiliency. The city has an energy task force which put together recommendations, so that they're actually well ahead of what some other communities have accomplished. And so this is probably the shortest chapter in the plan, but it advocates for some big ideas in terms of sustainability and resiliency and conservation, et cetera, in the future. Anything else on the conservation tab? Anything you think we're missing? Anything? Next major tab now is the development strategies. And this really focuses on the downtown development, business and housing development, and then sort of the different neighborhoods and places overall in the city. Chapter 8 is about strengthening and enhancing downtown. We really tried to weave in the survey results here in terms of what people felt was important. Again, with all of the issues that have been going along recently with Renaissance, we tried to be not too caught up in the contractual and other issues that the city is and Renaissance are grappling with at the present time, but really to lay out what our performance objectives are for the downtown and what we hope to accomplish over time in terms of improving and enhancing the downtown overall. So I think much of the language in here follows through from the 2000 plan. The recommendations, the guidelines were really all in place. It was a question really of continuing forward overall with these issues.
When on page 60, we had an email comment into the office that appropriate programming and marketing, that we have hired a marketing firm, a person over at the chamber. We partner with the chamber, the city's partnered with the chamber for a marketing professional.
Programming of events, which complement support physical improvement in the downtown.
Be a person or organization responsible for programming events.
Yeah. I think the
I
person...
can't say Mark's last name, I apologize.
I think the individual who was hired is primarily doing marketing,
Okay.
but we can certainly confirm that, but I believe his...
Marketing the city.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
Big B.
And then, of course, I wanted to add...
Let's change the wording here. So right now it says there will need to be. That clearly seems to state, if you will, that we don't have this at the present time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we just change it to read, there needs to be a person or organization. That means that we need to keep the current person, or we need to get a person on board. But it provides both meanings rather than the other one. So I think that's a good observation.
And Glenn, I pointed out last time the legend missing from the downtown policy
Yep.
area.
And this is really a question for the commission here. On the map on page 61, we've identified on an aerial photograph the downtown policy area. Bob and Ally and I got together and kind of talked this through. But we also talked about the possibility of this yellow appendage, if you will, which really extends out further east along Memorial Boulevard, Riverside Avenue, and includes the school. So we really didn't talk about this as part of our prior discussion. So the question for the commission here is, would you like the boundary of the downtown policy area to be just one line, which encompasses the areas currently shown in red or yellow, or would you like the legend to say, you know, the red line is the current policy area, and the yellow line is proposed or potential?
Aspirational.
Aspirational. But they're really sort of both aspirational in that sense. So how would the commission, what's your thoughts on our downtown policy area graphic here?
Adding or not adding, you know?
I think that the issue is that we either add a legend and classify red versus yellow, or we don't need a legend if we just go with one line, one border only, because that is then our downtown policy area.